Hello and welcome to another video with me, Rufus Gazelle. I'm currently walking down Tan House Lane here in Alton, a very small market town in Hampshire. Over 150 years ago, a young girl by the name of Fanny Adams lived here in Alton. It was a small town, very little crime, very peaceful, very idyllic, the sort of town you expect to find in England. On the 30th of April 1859 was the day that Fanny Adams was born. She lived on Tan House Lane behind us with her parents, George and Harriet Adams. I believe she had about 5 siblings. Not too sure, don't hold me on that, but we're gonna go with that. We're gonna go with 5 siblings. Apparently so, anyway. Next door to her lived her best friend, Minnie Warner, and they would play regularly down here at the Flood Meadows. Fanny was described as a tall, comely and intelligent girl. She appeared older than her actual age of 8 and was known locally for a lively and cheerful disposition. Her best friend Minnie Warner, like I said, was the same age and lived right next door to her. Alton was renowned for its plentiful supply of hops, which led to many breweries opening in the town and had made hop picking an integral part of its economy until the mid-20th century. So we are currently walking at the northern end of Tan House Lane, and here, where I'm currently walking right now, is the Flood Meadows. And next to the Flood Meadow is where they had hop fields. And sometimes this area during heavy rain would flood quite badly. Alton had previously seen no serious crime during the 19th century. The afternoon of the 24th of August 1867 was reported fine and sunny and hot. On that very day, back in 1867, Fanny and her sister Lizzie asked their mother, Harriet Adams, if they could go out and play with their best friend, Minnie Warner, who lived next door. If I hadn't mentioned that already, which I know I have. But the mother, Harriet Adams, agreed for them to go out and play down here at the Flood Meadows because it meant she could get on with her housework without being interrupted. Fanny and the local children had often played in the Flood Meadows owing to its proximity to Tan House Lane and the fact that there had been little crime in Alton within living memory. As the girls walked through the Flood Meadows and into the hop garden, they met Frederick Baker, a 29-year-old solicitor's clerk who resided here in Alton. He wore a frock coat, light-coloured trousers and a tall hat. Baker had moved from his former home in Guildford to work and live in Alton about 12 months previously. He was employed by a solicitor, Mr. Clements, whose office was situated on Alton High Street opposite the Swan Hotel, a hostelry which Baker frequented. Baker gave Minnie and Lizzie 3 halfpennies to spend on sweets and gave Fanny just a halfpenny, a singular halfpenny, to go out and do the same. Now the girls weren't concerned about taking the money from Baker because they frequently saw him at church meetings and therefore were not concerned. Baker watched as the girls ran up and down the Hollow, a lane that led to a small village called Alton, about 3 miles away. They say that it was nearby, but I don't think it actually was. I mean, 3 miles with a young child would take about 40 minutes. But Baker watched as they played and as they ate blackberries, which he had picked for them. After an hour or so went by, Minnie and Lizzie decided that they had had enough and returned home. And this is when Baker approached Fanny and asked her if she would like to go to Alton. And like I said, it was about 3 miles away. A good 40-minute walk. It has to be. But Fanny refused. And this is when Baker abducted her and took her into the nearby hop garden. I would say that this is the boundary of the flood meadows, and in front of me, the green area just over here could possibly be the hop garden in which Baker abducted Fanny Adams. Lizzie and Minnie ran back to Townhouse Lane to tell Minnie's mother, Martha Warner, what had happened. And she ignored their story, thinking basically it was gibberish. So they carried on playing, oblivious to Fanny's abduction. It wasn't until around 5 p.m. that evening, when they returned home for dinner, that they realised something was wrong. And unfortunately, it had. Mrs. Gardner, who also lived on Townhouse Lane, noticed Fanny's absence and asked the girls her whereabouts. The children relayed what had occurred earlier in the day and told Mrs. Gardner that Baker had taken Fanny away. Mrs. Gardner then relayed the information to Fanny's mother, Harriet, and the two women searched for her. Now, the two ladies had only walked a short distance by the time they met Baker, who was at the gate which separated the flood meadows to the hop garden. Now, according to the Hampshire Chronicle, Mrs. Gardner asked Baker what he had done with the child, but Baker reassured her by saying he often gave money to children to buy sweets. Mrs. Gardner replied, "I have a great mind to give you in charge of the police," to which Baker told her she could do what she liked. Baker's position in the town as the solicitor's clerk initially deflected any suspicions the two women had. Both returned to their homes believing Fanny was still playing in one of the surrounding fields. Between 7 and 8 p.m, Fanny had still not returned home, prompting Harriet and a group of neighbours to search for the missing child. As the evening was setting, the group began to search in the hollow with no success. In the nearby hop garden, however, labourer Thomas Gates, a Crimean War veteran who partook in the famous charge of the Light Brigade, found Fanny's head stuck on two hop poles while he was tending to the crops. Now, Fanny's ear had been severed from the head. There were two large cuts from mouth to ear running across the temple. Now, with further investigations, they discovered that parts of Fanny, the head, the arms, and the legs had been separated from the main trunk. There were 3 incisions on the left side of the chest and a deep cut on her arm. Fanny's forearm was cut off at the elbow joint and her left leg nearly severed at the hip joint, with her left foot cut off at the ankle point. Her right leg was torn from the trunk, and the whole contents of her pelvis and chest were completely removed. 5 further incisions had been made on the liver. Her heart had been cut out, and both her eyes had been removed and were found in the nearby River Wey. Overwhelmed with grief, Harriet collapsed on her way to inform her husband, George, who was playing cricket at the time. So the word was then sent instead. When George was told the details, he returned home to take his loaded shotgun and set out to look for the culprit. But neighbours stopped him and instead sat with him through the night. The next day, hundreds of people visited the hop garden to help collect Fanny's scattered remains. The police tried unsuccessfully to find the murder weapons. Now, they reckon that the people that are in the hop field searching inadvertently trampled down any clues to actually finding the murder weapons or any other evidence that could link the suspect to the murder. But they did collect the majority of Fanny's clothing, except for a hat. Now, the majority of the body parts were found on the day, with the exception of an arm, a foot, and her intestines, which were found the very next morning. But when they discovered the remaining parts, the foot, still had her shoe attached. And in her hand, she was still clutching the 2 halfpence that Baker had given her the day before. Unfortunately, Fanny's breastbone was never recovered. All her body parts were taken to the lithium bottle on Amery Street, a doctor's surgery, where the post-mortem would be carried out, and then her body parts sewn back together as best they could to then be collected by the authorities. And I'm going to take you to the lithium bottle on Amery Street right now. So here on Amery Street in Alton was the location of the lithium bottle. And here is the building in question. The lithium bottle where Fanny's remains were brought, reassembled, sewn together, and then collected by the authorities. Now, from the lithium bottle on Amery Street, the police officers of the Hampshire Constabulary took Fanny's body parts to the local police station. A stone that still had flesh and hair sticking from it was handed to the police as evidence. Hearing that Baker had been seen with the children before Fanny's disappearance, Cheney retraced his steps through the town and located his place of work. Arriving at the solicitor's office at 9 p.m, he found Baker still at work an hour later than usual. Baker protested, claiming his innocence. Despite being informed he was the only suspect, Cheney had no alternative but to arrest Baker on suspicion of murder. By this time, a large crowd, who were very agitated, had gathered outside the solicitor's office, forcing the police to smuggle Baker out the back door for fear that the mob would lynch him. When searched at the police station, Baker was found to have 2 unstained small knives. Spots of blood were observed on both wristbands of his shirt, and his trousers had been soaked to conceal the bloodstains. After being questioned about his appearance, Baker responded, "Well, I don't have a scratch or a cut on my hands to account for the blood." Baker's conduct during his interrogation was described as cool and collective. We were just talking about the solicitor's office where Frederick Baker worked here in Alton. It was 42 the High Street, I believe, opposite the Swan Hotel or the Swan Pub. I want to take you there right now and show you that very exact location here. So let's go. So here we have the Swan Hotel located on the High Street in Alton, and opposite is where Clement's solicitors once stood. I believe it's now where the Spice Bank is, the Indian restaurant. That was said solicitors back in 1867, where Frederick Baker once worked. And this is where the police caught up with him and finally arrested him. Clement's solicitors. Sometime after the arrest, Cheney backtracked to Baker's desk in the solicitor's office and discovered a diary among some legal papers. An entry had been made for Saturday the 24th of August 1867, which recorded, "Killed a young girl. It was fine and hot." The Chronicle reported that the hop garden had been cleared on the 21st of September, but nothing connected with the murder had been found. It also added that Baker remained completely unfazed by the killing and did not exhibit any symptoms of insanity or remorse. Baker was transferred to Winchester Prison on October the 19th. The trial took place at Winchester on the 5th of December. The defence contested Minnie's identification of Baker and claimed the knives found were too small for the crime. They also argued insanity. Baker's father had been violent, a cousin had been in asylums, his sister had died of brain fever, and he had attempted suicide after a love affair. The defence also argued that the diary entry was typical of the epileptic and formal way of entry that the defendant used, and the absence of a comma after the word killed did not render the entry a confession. After all this, it looked as if Baker was going to get away with it. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The jury only took 15 minutes to find him guilty, and thus he was sentenced to death. On December the 24th, Christmas Eve, Baker was hanged outside Winchester Prison. The crime had become notorious, and a crowd of 5,000 people attended the execution. This was the last public execution held at that prison in Winchester. They call it the unguarded hour before someone dies, before they are executed. And like Baker on Christmas Eve, on December the 24th at Winchester Prison, he was hung. And he wrote to the Adams family before this, just before, looking for forgiveness for the sorrow that he had caused, no doubt. Now, whether they did forgive him, who knows? But justice was definitely served, nonetheless. Now, after his death, they made a death mask of Baker, Frederick Baker, to be precise. And then the following year, a full figure of Baker was placed at the Chamber of Horrors at Madame Tussauds in London. Now, we've all heard of the expression sweet FA or sweet F all, meaning nothing. And that was originated from the death of Fanny Adams. Sweet Fanny Adams. Sweet FA. Now, the term sweet FA stems all the way back to 1869 when Siemens were introduced to new rations, tinned rations of mutton. And when I mean seamen, I mean sailors. No puns included. But these tins were literally worthless meat, leftovers that the sailors didn't enjoy eating at all. And they would reference the meat within these cans, the mutton, as parts of Fanny Adams, her body parts, which is a horrible thing to think about. And the fact that it was worthless and tasteless, that is where the expression stemmed from. Sweet FA, sweet F all. I don't want to swear. I'm trying to keep this channel of mine as clean as possible, but that is where the reference has originated. The tins of mutton that the sailors were given as rations. I think it's about time we tried to find the grave of Fanny Adams. We're here in the cemetery in Alton, and this is a very big cemetery. I've literally spent no longer than a minute looking for her grave, thinking it was going to be an absolute nightmare to find. I've literally just scanned around all the headstones thinking there's quite a lot to sift through. And then lo and behold, there is one headstone on its own by a tree. Guess what? The grave of sweet Fanny Adams with some lovely flowers to boot. I mean, this is lovely that there's flowers here. Normally graves that are over 150 years old, you would normally not find anything. But still, people are coming to visit and place lovely flowers like this. There's even some holly here, which I'm assuming was laid around the Christmas period. Now, the headstone reads, "Sacred to the memory of Fanny Adams, aged 8 years and 4 months, who was cruelly murdered on Saturday, August the 24th, 1867. Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both, soul and body in hell." Matthew 10, verse 28. This stone was erected by voluntary subscription. I'm not sure if you can actually see the engraving on the headstone. It might be quite hard to read, but you can just see or make out her name, Fanny Adams, there, aged 8 years and 4 months. I just wanted to add something that I'd forgotten to mention. This photograph you see here on the screen is a Fanny Adams headstone shortly after the burial. Next to the headstone on the right is Lizzie Adams, Fanny's sister, and on the left, Minnie Warner, her best friend. They were both there on Fanny's last day, the day she was abducted and brutally murdered. And now this, after a burial. Both looking very sad, crestfallen, knowing all too well what had happened to their sister and their best friend. So there we have it, the grave of sweet Fanny Adams. And man, this one's hit hard. I'm not gonna lie, out of all the graves I've been to, this one has just hit a nerve. She was young, so young. And even though it was over 150 years ago, it doesn't matter. She was still a child that was abducted and brutally murdered. Well, I think that just about does it for today. I appreciate if you've made it this far into the video, right to the end. I really do appreciate it. And all I've got left to say is, take care and goodbye. I'll see you in the next one.